What impressed me most is the greenery of the background of the city, and then I was particularly impressed by the substantial presence of the monastics. And also in the Chogye order, Korea has a very important kind of Buddhist organization and institution that could be a powerful vehicle to ensure that the Buddhism can continue to flourish and also thrive in this contemporary time. And also what impressed me deeply is the future orientation of the leadership of this order, particularly the most venerable Jinwoo. Some of you may know I'm a Tibetan. I grew up in a traditional Tibetan society in India as a refugee, but also Tibetan community is 99% Buddhist. And in our case, we have been very blessed to have the leadership of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who has right from the beginning been very proactive in engaging with modernity. For example, he has encouraged the monastic institutions to engage with science, for the Buddhist thinkers to collaborate with scientists, and also to really reach out to the lay community to really inspire them to engage with Buddha Dharma, not simply out of faith, but through understanding. In the West, Buddhism is increasingly popular, but engagement with Buddhism in the West is very different from engagement with Buddhism in the traditional Buddhist cultures. In the West, those who are interested in Buddhism, majority of them are not Buddhists. They are looking into Buddhism for something that they can take into their life and immediately apply it. So it's a very individualistic approach. It's a pick and choose. But on the positive side, it's a very practical approach because they take something that they can immediately use in their life. So for example, like many people in the West, they learn basic techniques of calming the mind through breathing. And then through mindfulness, they learn how to pay attention to their thoughts and emotions. And then also they learn to regulate their emotions based on the awareness. And then increasingly, through works such as my own work, they are beginning to engage with Buddhist techniques for cultivating compassion. So in essence, what they're looking for from Buddhism is to find a way to lead a life that is more peaceful, calm, less stressed, and also with that connecting with their good intention so that they can live a happy and meaningful life. But in the traditional Buddhist cultures, because of the traditional approach, we tend to emphasize devotion and faith. And then sometimes there is a tendency in almost all the traditional Buddhist cultures that understanding and knowledge of Dharma is the job of monastic members, and then the lay people's job is to simply revere and have devotion and serve the monastic community. But this approach worked for many centuries, but I don't think it works now. Because in the old days, loyalty to tradition matters. As society becomes more and more modern, individualistic, then the loyalty becomes less and less powerful. So in this modern contemporary cultural context, what needs to do is on the part of the individual members of the Buddhist community, including lay members, each of us need to find real purpose and meaning in the Dharma. We have to make Dharma real in our life. So this is what the Dalai Lama calls to be a 21st century Buddhist. So in other words, Buddhists in the traditional cultures need to combine devotion and understanding. And the understanding has to be rooted in some personal experience. So for example, if you are going through a very difficult time, for example, like a loss of a loved one or a separation from your loved one or financial, failure, in that moment, if you have benefited from applying the Dharma teaching, then your conviction in the power of Dharma is very deep. So the teachings in Buddhism is really rich. And the reason why Buddhism is so rich in meditation and mental practices is Buddhism is a religion with no God. So the understanding of enlightenment, understanding of salvation is really about purification of the mind, perfection of the mind. That's why in Buddhism, unlike other religions, there's a rich tradition of practices and psychology. So, right from the time of the Buddha, emphasis was on understanding your own mind and how it works. Venerable spoke about the example of the metaphor of second arrow. So the second arrow refers to how each of us individually react and respond to difficulties in our life. So as human beings with this body and mind, there's always going to be some kind of trouble, some kind of suffering. There is no suffering-free life unless you become enlightened, So you cannot protect yourself from suffering. And then trying to protect yourself from suffering is a waste of energy because you don't know where the suffering is going to come from. Because a large extent, sufferings come from many other conditions that are beyond your control. There is a great Indian master, 8th century, who said that trying to protect yourself from sufferings by changing the environment is like trying to cover the whole earth with leather, so that your feet does not get pricked by a thorn.
Right.
But by protecting the small space under your feet by leather, does the same job. So that is the secret of Buddha's teaching, how to change the world by changing your own mind. So all of us are going to face adversity, but how we respond to the adversities makes all the difference. In contemporary society, everybody complains about stress. So stress is a very natural human response to challenges. So stress as a response is actually a positive thing. So because when stress kicks in, chemical processes in the body change. So for example, in the animal world, when there's a lion nearby chasing a zebra, the stress hormone kicks in, and then the zebra runs away. But then in the animal world, when the threat is gone, then the animal relaxes. But the problem with the modern human stress is that we carry it in our mind all the time. So again here, it's the mind that exaggerates the suffering and brings that second arrow. So when your mind is dominated by stress and you are reacting negatively to stress situations, and then even if you have the best intention, you don't have the composure of mind do anything constructively because your mind is completely overtaken. So what Buddhist meditation teaches is the ability to relax our mind and then also pay attention and bring awareness, be in the present, and don't immediately react. So for example, if you are caught in a very difficult situation, for example, like your teenage daughter is shouting back at you, so you get really angry, okay? So now, if you are a meditator, then you will be immediately remember you are reacting, so you will take a deep breath and immediately cut that chain reaction. But if you immediately react, and then it's like two hands clapping, fighting with each other, so then you are fueling the negative energy. Whereas if you take a step back, a simple breathe, there cannot be, even though there's a Zen koan asking what is the sound of one hand clapping, but you cannot clap with one hand.
Okay.
So all of these techniques for calming down our mind, learning to pay attention, bring awareness into the situation, all of this is there in the Dhamma, there in the Buddha's teaching. So Buddhists should not think that Dharma is all about future life and nirvana, and this life's problem we have to look for a therapist or a counselor or doctors. That's the wrong attitude. In fact, Buddha himself compares the Dharma to medicine, and it is the medicine of the ailment of the mind. So the best approach to promoting mental well-being is to use Dharma as a preventive method. Because if you create the space in your mind, with awareness, ability to pay attention, bring kind of, pauses in your reaction, you create a kind of a way of relating to the world and which makes your mind quite resilient. So in my own kind of personal work, one of the emphases I bring, especially to the secular world, is on compassion. The Buddhism that flourished and flourishes in South Korea is that of Mahayana tradition. And the essence of Mahayana tradition is the union of compassion and wisdom. In fact, this union of compassion and wisdom is symbolically there in the Heart Sutra, which is so sacred to all the Mahayana tradition. For example, the Heart Sutra is structured as a conversation between Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara. So paying attention to the compassion part is particularly important today. The wisdom part is more difficult because you have to understand the teaching on emptiness and you need to have advanced level of meditation. It's a bit more complicated, but the compassion part is more easy to understand and cultivate. There is a reason why across all the Buddhist cultures, the Buddha's Jataka tales, the previous life stories, are such an important object of worship. So in essence, Jataka tales are stories of Buddha's compassion in action. And also in the Mahayana teachings, we celebrate the Buddhas taking the Bodhisattva vow. So not only do we celebrate it, but also we individually, practitioners, also take Bodhisattva vows. So in Mahayana Buddhism, when it comes to the cultivation of qualities, compassion is really emphasized. So compassion is almost like the mother of all the great virtues. There is a beautiful statement attributed to the Buddha in one of the scriptures, where the Buddha says this: what is that single virtue which when you have in your hand, all other virtues come together? Compassion. So the beauty of Buddhism is that not only we take compassion as an object of admiration and reverence, but in fact there are practices that we can use to cultivate it. The reason for that, particularly in Mahayana Buddhism, is the idea of enlightenment is not something that you are getting it from outside. Enlightenment is essentially a perfection of the seeds of the qualities that is inside you. And this is the basis of that idea is the concept of the Buddha nature, which you are familiar. So, for example, all of us, we have a natural capacity to feel empathy for a suffering person. We don't have to learn this. Yeah. It is a very natural response. And if someone is suffering, like acutely in pain and crying, even if we don't know the person, we will respond in this way. We can choose to suppress this, but if we allow, and that suppression could be because we don't like the person or something is wrong with the background of the relationship. We can bring all sorts of reasons to obstruct it, but if we don't suppress it, our natural response would be that of empathy. So when we allow our natural response to kick in, then actually there are three things happening at the same time, almost same time. One is we see the situation and we understand the suffering. then we feel moved by that suffering, and then we want to do something, or at least we want to see the suffering relieved. This is a very natural human response. We are all familiar with it. And another thing that you will notice is that when we feel this way, at that moment, there is no self-agenda. The focus is the other person. That is compassion. It's a very natural human quality. The only difference is whether we cultivate it or whether leave it simply at the level of response. So the only difference between the Buddha's compassion and our compassion is our compassion is limited by situation. We only respond this way when someone is suffering in front of us, whereas for the Buddha, it is universal. So one of the things that we are finding now from scientific research is that the more we cultivate this, interestingly, the person becomes happier. It's a kind of a paradox because compassion involves paying attention to suffering, and one would expect double suffering, but in fact, it's the opposite. And the way in which the scientists understand is that because what is happening is that when you allow your natural compassion to express, in a sense, you are getting some freedom from your obsessive self-focus. And it turns out a large part of the stress is actually, again, coming from excessive self-focus. So the more we open our heart, it seems to create more space to deal with suffering. So in a sense, what we are doing is we are choosing to respond in a conscious way. Another reason why compassion promotes personal well-being is compassion involves making connection with someone. And this is total opposite of loneliness, which is often the source of suffering. And another factor is that when we allow our compassion to express, then when we are able to help someone, then we feel a sense of fulfillment. There's a purpose behind it. And also, one of the important things is that we are going to respond to a situation one way or another. So when we face a challenge, we can respond to that situation out of anger, out of fear, out of judgment. So we are going to respond one way or another. So when we choose compassion as a motivation in a situation, that really makes all the difference. So what we are doing is we are actually choosing to be in the world in a different way. That doesn't mean that we are going to be blind to the reality, that we are not going to be blind to reality. Choosing compassion means you do not forget the humanity of the other person. But, what it does mean is that you always take into account the welfare and the interest of the person that you are interacting with. His Holiness the Dalai Lama often says that when you choose compassion, you're opening your heart. And when you open your heart, it's easier to communicate and connect. It also brings a kind of a clarity of a vision in a situation. Say, for example, if you are caught up in a very difficult relationship with a colleague at a workplace, and you don't know what to do, you're confused, you're worried, so then there's nothing more clarifying than simply to ask yourself, what is the most compassionate thing to do here? And especially when you choose compassion, there's a kind of a courage because you have a self-confidence because you're not bringing excessive self-agenda, so you can be more transparent. And when you're more transparent, there is a confidence and courage behind it. And the key wisdom, compassion really brings to you is the person in front of me is just like me. Doesn't want suffering, wants to be happy. If we don't choose compassion, if we choose fear, if we choose anger, if we choose judgment, then constantly your state of mind is that of anxiety. And sadly, in contemporary society, because the life is so complicated, many people live their life primarily in a state of mind that is anxious. Whereas if we bring teachings like compassion from the Dharma, from Buddhism, we can be a bit more relaxed. You know, in the end, just like everybody else, I am suffering too, I have problems, others too have problems, so what is the big deal? So through cultivation of compassion, enhancing that natural compassion you have, you can be more relaxed, you can be more courageous, and also you can have a greater sense of fulfillment and joy. In the West, they have this analogy of being able to look into yourself in the mirror at the end of the day and feeling good about it. Compassion is not going to solve all the problem, but it will go a long way in making you feel good about yourself. And also it will make your quality of your relationship with the people in your life much better. I have had the privilege to serve His Holiness the Dalai Lama for almost over 37 years as his translator, traveled with him extensively. And one thing that has always inspired me being with him is that there is a genuine sense of ease. You know, I've traveled with him, so sometimes he will be meeting, you know, leaders of the great nations or maybe royal family members, and then the staff is all getting very stressed, but he's completely relaxed. And also there is a deep joy in him. I mean, he's one of the most joyful person. So all of this is really coming from his commitment to making compassion real in his life all the time. So my request to you, my Dhamma brothers and sisters, is to look into the Buddhist teachings and look at the compassion aspect with a torchlight, and then as much as possible embody it by bringing it into your own everyday life. In the introduction, it was informed that I was a monk for a long time, but now I'm a lay person, a father of 2 girls. But the teachings from the Dharma has been so powerful in my own personal life as a family man, living in the West, struggling to do everything that everybody does, paying the bills, and always being able to maintain my joy and peace of mind. So although my own kind of work and passion is really preservation and dissemination of Tibetan text, but having exposed to the Dharma and having found the power of Dharma in my own life in the contemporary world, I feel motivated to really, as much as possible, share my own experience and insights from the Dharma as widely as possible to help many people in the contemporary world to deal with their own everyday suffering. Because many of the sufferings that we see in today's world at the personal level, they can be really helped through the Dharma. With a physical illness, you need medication, but many of the problems are mental in nature, and those problems can really be helped by Dharma. So, and sadly, many of these problems which so many people experience are in principle avoidable because they belong to the second arrow category. So especially those who grew up in the Buddhist culture, it'll be in your own advantage to look deeply into the resources in the Buddha's teaching and as much as possible apply them in your life. And you have monastic teachers who can help you, but also on your side, you also need to learn and apply them, make them real. So in the end, the power of Dharma, Buddha's teaching, only becomes real when you practice it and apply it. His Holiness the Dalai Lama was once asked by someone that the Buddha's teachings are more than 2,500 years old, and today's time is very different. How can the Buddha's teaching be relevant today? That was the question that was asked. His response was, over this 2,500 to 600 years, human beings have essentially remained the same, and the problems have remained the same. Suffering of loss, suffering of death, suffering of poverty, all of these, as well as the mental poisons of attachment, anger, jealousy, hatred, all of these problems are the same. So the solution that the Buddha has taught still remains powerful. And he added that from a scientific point of view, the structure, shape, and size of the human brain has not really changed at all during this period. And he said that in future, if in 100,000 years, if human brain size and structures change, maybe then it's a different story. So as a Tibetan myself, I often tell my own community, especially when I'm speaking to the youth, that I feel sad that sometimes the younger generation do not appreciate the value of the jewel they have in their own tradition. So here too in the Buddhist culture, I think it would be sad if the younger generation, because of their lack of understanding, do not have the opportunity to access the value of Buddha Dharma. Because if they appreciate the value of the Dharma early on, so many problems they will face, sufferings they will experience, could be prevented. And even scientific research after research shows that when you feel connected with something bigger than yourself, you have a more meaningful life, you have a happier life. Whereas if you are living purely secular life from an individualistic perspective, your life becomes narrow. So life is going to go on, whether we live it in a meaningful way or not meaningful way. This is the law of impermanence. Law of impermanence can never be stopped. But how we live that life is in our hand. So if we choose the path of Dharma, we don't feel alone. In Buddhism, we speak of three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And the Sangha creates a community, and we don't feel alone. So the loneliness doesn't become a problem. So you will be able to live a life that is richer, both in meaning and in connections. So here I have a request to the venerable members who are the leadership of the Buddhist community here to find ways in which kind of the younger generation, the Dharma teachings can resonate to the younger generation. And one very important aspect of that is bring something that is immediately applicable right now, something that they can use in their everyday life. Even the simple ability to quieten your mind through breathing for 2 minutes. I don't think expecting the younger generation to sit down for hours or 30 minutes or 40 minutes, I think that is asking too much. But if we can teach them the ability to quieten their mind, even within a minute or two through breathing, it can be very powerful. Yesterday, we had the privilege to share silent practice with the 30,000 people. And each of us were there together, but each of us could feel the power of that silence. And whatever degree of peace that we experienced, that come from inside ourselves. Nobody brought it to us. So if we can teach the younger generation through breathing, through quietening their thoughts, even for a minute, they will taste what it feels like to be in peace. And then if they're able to do this, then they know when they need it, they can go to that place. So this is in modern commercial language, this is the reward. When you have a reward, you become a reward. Reward, then you become more motivated to do it again. In the old days, it was good enough to tell the Dharma practitioners, if you do good, you will have a good future life. You will gain nirvana. If you do bad things, you will go to, lower realms. So that kind of motivation was effective in the past. But in today's generation, no, it's too far away. So I think if we are able to bring to younger generation a kind of a power of Dharma in very simple terms that they can understand, they can use in their life. For example, like teachings on emotional awareness, when they're able to recognize that they are getting angry, and then being able to bring awareness, they are able to restrain themselves. So these basic skills which people in the West are learning from Buddhism, we need to bring it to the younger generation in our own community. So in essence, I've been talking a lot about compassion, but of course Buddha's teaching is richer than that. Here I would like to cite from a particular ancient text which identifies 5 attributes of the Dharma, Buddha's teaching. So this is from a very ancient praise to the Buddha, and praising the Buddha for teaching Dharma, which has these 5 attributes. The first attribute is that Buddha's teaching is true. The second is it's undeceiving. So when you place trust in the Buddha's teaching, it will not let you down. So it's undeceiving. And it teaches restraint of the senses. So this touches upon Buddha's teaching's emphasis on less attachment, because many of the problems are too much orientation towards the material world and attachment. So this is the restraint of the senses. And then the fourth attribute is that it teaches how to, pacify distorted thoughts and emotions, because many of the problems are caused by emotions and distorted thoughts. And this particular feature really captures the teachings of meditation, like shamatha and wisdom, vipassana. So it's Son meditation is a powerful example of that combination of meditation, samatha, and wisdom. And then the final attribute is that it is compassionate. So in other words, Buddhism, the essence of the Buddha's teaching is that the cultivation of the heart through compassion and cultivation of the mind through wisdom combined with meditation. And the engagement with the Dharma, it is not enough to have it here. It has to be brought down here. And what brings the Dharma knowledge from here to here is practice and meditation particularly. See, in other words, the understanding of the Dharma has to become integrated in your personality. So at the beginning, the approach will be definitely conscious, effortful, and deliberate. But through practice, then it will become less effortful and less, conscious, and it eventually becomes a second nature. So in practical terms, how do we do this? So as Mahayana Buddhists, the first step for us is to really, as much as possible, contemplate the value of compassion and wisdom. We have to have a deep sense of admiration in these qualities. So there's a reason why many of the Mahayana texts starts with praises of compassion and praises of wisdom. So the psychology behind that is the same as the modern world's publicity, it's the same. So then it's important to set your intention, because intention is one area where you have a control, you have a choice. So make compassion and wisdom part of your intention, particularly compassion. Then in actual day-to-day life, as much as possible, pay attention to the situation and bring compassion and wisdom in your everyday engagement with the world. And then as part of your daily practice, you should also spend at least 2 to 5 minutes in silent sitting. Find a way to calm your thoughts and slow down. And for that, the best techniques is to do breathing. Breath is very interesting. It's not completely physical, but it's also not mental. Breath. And also breathing is something that we don't have to make effort. It comes naturally. So simply bringing your attention and resting it on your breath creates that ability to quieten. So if you do this practice, then in the everyday situation, when there is a challenging situation, you can learn to breathe. You will remember to breathe. Because otherwise, even if you have the best compassionate intention, but if you are not able to bring awareness, then you're going to react.
Right.
And then in particular challenging situations, then you should make a conscious effort to apply compassion in the situation. And then after the interaction is over, don't just move on, but reflect briefly. So in this way, you create a new pattern of engagement. And at the end of the day, briefly, before going to bed, at some point, it's good to look back on the day so that you make connection between the morning intention and evening closure. And then it's important to rejoice, bring joy in your practice, because joy is what is going to sustain your motivation. So in fact, in Mahayana Buddhism, one of the virtues is, diligence, tsundru, and the definition of tsundru is taking joy in doing good deeds. So in brief, appreciating the value of compassion and wisdom, setting your intention, learning some techniques of quieting and calming your mind, and then bringing compassion intentionally in your everyday engagement, and then at the end of the day, reflecting and rejoicing. So today is a very good day to start this practice, this new kind of approach, because yesterday many of you may have taken the vow at this big, gathering. So you should write down yesterday's date and today's lecture, and then after maybe 2 or 3 weeks, look back to see if there is any progress. And I assure you, it doesn't take very long to really see the benefit. So those of us who really admire the Buddha's teaching, want to make it real in our own life, then I think you should be the model. And if you can embody it, then people around you will feel the power. And even in practical terms, this is a beautiful way of making our life meaningful. And as a Buddhist, I truly believe in the statement that the Buddha's Dharma is the source of happiness for all beings. So any form of sharing the wisdom and teachings of the Buddha is for the benefit of all beings. It's not a question of increasing the number of Buddhists. Whether one calls oneself Buddhist or not, but the benefit of the Dharma can be experienced by anyone. And in the end, the Buddha himself said that he has taught one thing only, suffering and its removal. So even in conventional terms, if we live our life just for our own sake and the family members, it's a narrow life. Whereas if we live our life for more people, trying to benefit more people, that is a meaningful and rich life. This is particularly important for those who follow Mahayana Buddhism, because Mahayana Buddhism practitioners are supposed to be committed to the removal of suffering of all beings. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
감사합니다. But